Prince Andrew being named in the Jeffrey Epstein court documents unsealed last night didn't come as much of a surprise, but there were a few more unusual names mentioned, from Michael Jackson to Stephen Hawking. To give their reaction to what we've just heard, here we've got a great panel: Director of Communications at Henry Jackson Society, Megan Gittos, Editor of Spikes Online, Tom Slater, and Parliamentary sketch writer for The Telegraph, Madeline Grant. Very good evening to all of you. It's quite a story, this, really. I mean, looking at the headline that we first see tonight, the Epstein Files, Andrew in orgy on Epstein Island, that's not even the best story, really, in a way. But, I mean, what do you say? I mean, you've listened to what we heard from Daphne Barrack there and from all the American interests, but, Megan, what are you making of it all? The
fact that a royal is on the front of the Metro tomorrow with this story is monumental. It's huge. It's going to be difficult to shake off.
Yeah.
I know he's kind of trying to move on from it, and he paid his money, or we paid the money.
Yeah.
But this...
Well, we think the Queen gave him the money, don't we?
Yeah.
Whatever it was.
It's damning evidence on a lot of people. And most of the people on the names in the list, of course, it's not evidence of any crime being committed. They were either, I believe, subpoenaed, or they were just on the flight documents.
Yeah.
But this is heavy. This is really heavy stuff. He's going to find it difficult.
This is because it's linked, Tom, isn't it, to everything? You know, there's only so much you can deny without really properly denying it. Like we were just saying to Daphne Barrack there, you know, will Andrew finally admit that he actually knew this woman, who he up till now has denied ever meeting, despite giving her an amount of money which may be between, I don't know, 4 million and 12 million.
Will he ever to do with someone you never met?
Yeah. Will he ever cooperate with the FBI? Would that help him? Would it hinder him? Would it make it worse? Bill Clinton, you know, nobody's that surprised that there's a sign saying Bill likes them young. I mean, but Stephen Hawking was quite a sort of eye-opener, wasn't it?
It was a striker, but we should say that where Stephen Hawking, a lot of these names are concerned, they haven't been accused of any specific wrongdoing. I think in his case, he was on Epstein's island because he was speaking at a conference that was on the adjoining island and was funded by Jeffrey Epstein or whatever. But it did provide us with a very amusing series of memes last night. But I think when the people who are slightly more, if not banged to rights, they've got more of a case to answer, it does tend to be people like Prince Andrew, who... Prince Andrew being alleged to have done some, shall we say, not particularly reputable things is a bit of a man bites dog story at this point, really. So I just don't know how much further his kind of public standing could fall unless there's something more criminal allegations.
Yes. But yet, Madeline, did we not see at Christmas a kind of attempt, it looked like a bit of an attempt anyway, to rehabilitate, from King Charles's point of view, his brother Andrew? You know, because there was a lot of talk about would he be seen at the Christmas walk to church, and yes, he was, as was his former wife, Sarah, Duchess of York. You know, so it looked as though Charles was trying to kind of help him out, didn't it?
Yeah, it did look like they were trying to bring him back at least into the family fold. I mean, there was no question that I think any sort of public role for him will never be on the table ever again. But I think there was an attempt, much as the late Queen had done, to kind of suggest he is still part of our family. He's not going to be taking part in public life, but he still, you know, does belong to this family.
Right.
But I wouldn't be surprised if now there were, after these very serious allegations, far fewer efforts on that front.
Yeah, because also looking at these names, I mean, it struck me when I was reading the various bits that I have read. It's like a weird dream, isn't it? You know, like suddenly there are all these, but you go into the next room and there's David Copperfield, you know, doing some kind of magic trick, and then look over there's Stephen Hawking talking to some people. And meanwhile, I remember watching that Netflix documentary about the Epstein house in Florida, and it was sort of full of what you might call rather questionable art and some rather sort of odd erotica that was everywhere, you know, pictures of young women. You couldn't possibly be associated with this guy without knowing that he was a sleazy character.
I think a lot of predators, it's common knowledge, a lot of psychiatrists say this, a lot of predators, they get off, sorry, pardon the pun, but on trying to put it in people's face. But also drawing back. A lot of it doesn't surprise me that politicians or people that needed some sort of money or lifestyle funding, perhaps a young model, were hanging out with him. He was a billionaire and he took everyone to lavish parties. There'll be a lot of people who are pretty innocent in this. And in regards to the art or the young girls that they were introduced to, some people really do enjoy that sadist kind of hinting at what a depraved person they are.
Yeah, but watching back some of the Jimmy Savile stuff when that show came out, you know, you couldn't believe quite the actual proper footage, not just the Steve Coogan stuff, but the things he said on television. People would kind of be quite open about what he was doing.
Yeah, I rewatched the Louis Theroux documentary where he meets Jimmy Savile over Christmas, and it was just shocking with hindsight how absolutely hiding in plain sight it all was.
Right.
I mean, this wasn't even in the 1970s where that kind of louche behaviour was more common and perhaps more tolerated. This was made in the late 90s or the early noughties, you know,
it
right
was,
up
it was
until...
very brazen, wasn't it?
Yeah.
There's no question about that. And obviously people like Epstein exist, and I guess it'd be stupid to pretend that they don't. But I just find it amazing, as Daphne Barrick said, that somebody like Bill Gates, for example, he doesn't need money. He doesn't need to be told, you know, you can come on my private jet. He can buy 15 private jets, you know, so there must be something more to the story, is all I'm saying.
Well, it's difficult, isn't it? Because on the one hand, a lot of these people who are hiding in plain sight, they do kind of get away with it. I think about that Louis Theroux example. He was felt like a bit of an innocent in the case of that. And I think there's probably a lot of these people who were just probably a bit in awe of the wealth, a bit in awe of him as an individual.
And the company.
The company, all of that stuff that was everyone coming in and out of those islands and those properties and whatever. But it is striking that, of course, he had already pled guilty to some of these crimes way before the charges that we're talking about today really came through. And yet people were still dealing with him.
And Andrew was one of those people who remained friends with him and was photographed with him in Central Park.
Also Lord Mandelson. And Keir Starmer was actually asked this today during the press conference after his speech. The fact that it was reported that Mandelson had socialised with him and gone to stay with him in New York, much like Prince Andrew did after the first indictment.
Right. It does seem as though it was some kind of almost private, exclusive club that was open 24 hours in any part of the world they happen to be in. And I guess rock stars do live like that. And there's a picture of him with Epstein in Central Park. And that was, of course, after he'd been convicted of paedophile offences, not just that he was suspected of them. And so, you know, Andrew really doesn't have anywhere to go here, I don't think, does he?
No, he doesn't. He absolutely doesn't. I think he needs to go away quietly if he loves the royal family in the way he says he does. I don't necessarily begrudge them being seen with him on Christmas Day. You can't punish people for the sins of their father, if you will, or brother, but there is no way you can go from this. The evidence is stacking up too high, and a lot of the witness statements throughout this whole process have kind of correlated. But I think the most frightening thing of that whole documentary that you mentioned, the Epstein one, is one of the women who were on the trial said his house was full of cameras constantly, because he was such he had no friends, absolutely no one. He always said, if I go down, other people will come with me, and not a single shred of evidence of any of that has ever come to light. And this could be them remembering it wrong, or it could have been something that he was just saying to wind one of them up. But I mean, I'm glad they've made this all public, because the whole thing has looked strange.
It's very weird.
You can't help people who think it's a conspiracy that they're covering up.
Well, I was going to come to that, but we might have to wait until we get you guys back in once the other papers come in, because there is a train of thought, shall we say, that this guy was some kind of a plant for God knows who, to sort of keep an eye on the rich and famous, or to get dirt on the rich and famous, a compromat, whatever you may want to call it. And maybe that's what he was, but it's just all very weird to me. But
well, I think it's also. I would also think that some of the unfolding of the allegations today, and looking actually what is in black and white, it's a lot of stuff that we already knew. I think that it's actually, if anything, has exploded some of the grander claims of he's the sort of linchpin of some sort of international sort of paedophile ring of all these global people. It was clearly one very depraved individual with some very depraved people around him, and some people who have some questions to answer. But I do think it's important that we don't indulge or play into that kind of conspiratorial mindset that flares around everything, because it can take what is clearly a very evil set of crimes and try to turn them into something fantastical.
And there's a lot of that going on social media. MT says, we all know that if these were ordinary, everyday people, that jail would have come to them before now, but entitled, famous, rich people get away with it. Ruben says, our leaders are the worst examples of humanity. Not surprised at all. We'll get onto that more when we talk about the elections coming up as well. For the moment, thank you very much indeed.